Global instability isn't something a single president can simply switch off. Between 2021 and 2025, specific geopolitical forces were always going to collide. The invasion of Ukraine, the October 7th attacks, and the century's deadliest pandemic. These were fixed historical shocks, driven by pressures far larger than American domestic politics. But imagine entering that window of time with a system that had been continuously fortified, where global health partnerships and strategic alliances were treated as vital assets to be maintained, rather than burdens to be cut. Under a second Clinton administration, the focus remained on the unglamorous work of governance, keeping professional agencies like the CDC fully staffed and ensuring the national stockpiles were ready for a test everyone knew was coming. Elections do not stop the arrival of global crises. They only determine if the nation's firehouses are stocked with professional staff and the right supplies when the sparks fly. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, the Western response was immediate because it was pre-negotiated. Sanctions and financial expulsions hit Moscow within hours, not days, because the alliance framework was already intact. Moscow relied on its energy weapon, the hope that Europe's deep dependence on Russian natural gas would act as a strategic shield, preventing the West from imposing a truly crushing economic cost. But that shield was brittle. In this timeline, the U.S. had successfully blocked the Nord Stream 2 pipeline project years earlier, treating energy security as a core strategic priority. By subsidizing liquefied natural gas infrastructure and securing long-term purchase guarantees, the administration provided European allies with an immediate alternative to Russian supply before the first missile was ever fired. Breaking that dependence didn't prevent the war, but it allowed the West to impose maximum economic costs on the Kremlin without triggering a total industrial collapse across the Atlantic. The economic blow was still severe, worsened by global supply chain fragilities. However, because pandemic response planning had been a priority since 2021, the domestic medical and manufacturing supply lines were already stabilized. Even with those preparations, the energy shock sent prices soaring, creating a visceral financial squeeze that every household felt at the gas station sign. This chart shows the actual history of U.S. inflation. You can see the curve climb to a 40-year peak of 9.1% in June 2022 as global shocks overwhelmed the economy. In our alternate timeline, the curve peaks lower, at 7.8%. This delta was the result of earlier Fed action and more targeted fiscal policy that blunted the inflationary impulse before it could spiral. That slightly cooler inflation rate allowed functional international institutions to manage the resulting sovereign debt crisis, coordinating relief for countries like Sri Lanka through the IMF rather than leaving them to face a chaotic default. Proactive management didn't make the global crisis disappear, but it prevented localized economic shocks from maturing into a systemic global depression. The October 7th attacks arrived as a tertiary shock, threatening to ignite a wider regional war that would consume the entire Middle East. Because the administration had maintained functional, consistent ties with Qatar, a hostage negotiation framework was established within 10 days, keeping a diplomatic channel open during the most volatile hours of the crisis. As the conflict intensified, the scale of destruction in Gaza created a humanitarian catastrophe that placed immense pressure on American diplomatic credibility across the globe. Instead of blocking international action, the U.S. negotiated the text of UN resolutions to secure humanitarian corridors, utilizing its seat at the table to create a legal framework for civilian protection. The administration eventually moved to condition military aid, specifically withholding heavy artillery from use in densely populated areas to reduce the categories of civilian harm. These diplomatic constraints successfully deterred a wider regional confrontation, keeping the conflict localized, while Iron Dome batteries intercepted direct threats from the north and east. The war was not clean, and the human cost remained agonizing, but the U.S. preserved enough credibility to manage the aftermath and prevent a total regional escalation. By early 2025, the alternate timeline is still bruised, the economy remains strained, and the wars in Ukraine and Gaza have not been resolved. But because the nation's public health institutions and response plans were never dismantled, Approximately 350,000 fewer Americans died in the pandemic than in actual history. Those lives are the direct result of maintained institutional capacity. This is the difference between a country struggling with its challenges and a country that has lost the capacity to face them at all. The unglamorous work of maintaining institutions is the only variable a nation controls. You cannot know which crises are coming. You can only ensure you are ready when the world arrives to test you.